20 years ago, a reality TV series about a struggling promotion aired on Spike TV that, for better or worse, would go on to change the landscape of sports and pop culture. This is a retrospective of that series, its key players, and its lasting legacy. This is TUFtwenty.
TUFtwenty is brought to you by The Contrarians, a movie podcast where we are right and you're wrong. Be sure to subscribe to The Contrarians on your favorite podcatcher for access to this entire series, as well as Julio and Alex's most recent film follies. Our main website, wearethecontrarians.com, houses all of our past episodes as well.
You can find The Contrarians across social media under the handle @ContrarianPrime.
It's not just us, though. As for this 14-part journey of nostalgia and shame, we've got a championship corner.
I'm Joe Holbert, and for years I've discussed fake fighting on the internet. Now, however, I'm trying my hand at the real thing. Usually, you can find me at the Late Night Grim, but for this particular adventure, I'll be sitting under the Team Couture learning tree, providing insight to my fellow men of honor.
It's niche micro-celebrity Steve. You may know me from Twitter, the Songs with Friends podcast, or various scuffles in the world of professional wrestling. By the end of this journey, you are no doubt going to feel this, because this is the ultimate.
Now that the cage door is locked, let's get down to business.
Time to talk asparagus.
Looks like he just nodded. All right. He's going to be okay. He's okay. That's the danger that comes, and it happens much more frequently than it does in boxing because he's open-hand gloves.
And Chuck's reaction, too, was, oh, man, I don't want that. I don't need that.
Neither one of them wants that.
No, they want it. They want to battle it out.
Well, these are real warriors. I mean, they want a definitive ending to this battle. Randy might be hurt.
Yeah, Randy might be hurt. Randy trying to close in, though, now. And he's down. And Chuck Liddell.
Oh, he is out.
Light heavyweight champion of the world.
Randy Couture is
Chuck
out.
Liddell is the light heavyweight champion.
Unbelievable. Wow.
And Chuck Liddell is the new light heavyweight champion of the world. The words of Mike Goldberg echoing throughout the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, Nevada at UFC 52. Now, for those of y'all who have been kind of keeping up with what we're doing, you know, we actually all watched this fight together recently over on Late Night Grin Gold, LNG Gold. Julio, what were your thoughts? You know, we had a lot of fun that night, but we watched a whole, a bundle of brawls, I guess you could say. Chuck put Randy out. He put him out cold, too. Were you disappointed? Were you pulling for Team Green? How'd you feel in the moment?
No, I was not. I think just knowing that Joe was rooting for Couture, that made me Team Chuck, because I feel like we had to have, not because I wanted to be against Joe, but I felt like Couture had enough support. Randy didn't need anybody else in his corner, so I needed to be on Chuck, especially because Willa was not there that I could see, and nobody else seemed to. Everybody's always, whenever you three talk about Chuck Liddell in the future, it's always with a tinge of I don't know, sadness, the disappointment. Yeah. So I was like, I hope this guy gets a win at least here. So in our ending, we can just say that he went out on a high. I know that Randy is a Hollywood actor now, so he's all set, and thankfully it all paid off. It was the Chuck Liddell that you guys have been building up over the last 13 recordings. He came out to play and Randy. And also, you said Couture had won before, like the last time that they fought. Mm-hmm. So it just felt like it was nice to even the scales. Yeah,
that's Chuck Liddell, the Iceman, certainly showed up here. Joe, I know it was hard for you to relive here, especially after the chronological order we watched all this in. But Randy played with fire, man. He marched forward at Chuck Liddell, and that's not a smart thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, that was unnecessary, but I'm working on some stuff. I'll be invoicing you about the renewed therapy that this has put me through, this grin along business you were just mentioning. But, it is what it is. We still have the first fight. We'll have to run it back sometime, and we'll watch that one on loop maybe for 2 hours next time. No, I shouldn't have put you in control of the playlist, but nonetheless, live and learn. And as Julio mentioned, the happy ending awaits, I suppose, here as we... this should be an interesting adventure here, certainly. Interesting adventure, granted. Adventure, I think, would be a generous word for the one we just concluded with the Ultimate Fighter. So how much more interesting can it get? I think we're going to find out today.
And timely as well. And we'll circle back to this towards the end of this episode. But, Vice TV got wind of this project when we started putting together last year, and all of a sudden they want to put out a documentary on the first season of The Ultimate Fighter. So, a little bit ahead of the curve here. And for
They
spoiler
contacted
alert,
Steve to see if he could sing the Mario song for them.
they couldn't get the licensing rights. But spoiler alert, their research was not quite as in depth. They may have had the resources of interviews and whatnot, but we'll get back to that here in just a moment. For the purposes of what we're doing today, this is you could call it a Where Are They Now episode. This is the fallout. This is the post-mortem, however you want to word it. But I figured coming off the heels of the Grinalong and the fight we just mentioned, it'd be best to start with our coaches. And Steve, we watched this fight together, and we've talked about this along the way, how leading into the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, Chuck was the most recognizable figure in the UFC outside of Tito Ortiz. But after the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, and after he captured the light heavyweight championship here in his knockout against Randy Couture, Chuck Liddell became the face of the UFC. And, this hadn't become yet the supernova it would eventually become. But Chuck Liddell was a celebrity at this point in time.
Chuck Liddell became a white trash icon on the same level of Kid Rock.
That was unnecessary.
Too far.
Politics aside, keep in mind, I work at the time. I worked in Southern Indiana. I lived in the greater Louisville, Kentucky area. And life was a lot of affliction shirts. And did you see Chuck's fight last night? Yeah, Chuck became the working man celebrity after that, for sure.
His face was, in the sports world, becoming pretty popular. Be courtside, on the field. Julio Chuck, would be on the cover of. He was the first MMA fighter, I believe, that was ever on the cover of ESPN magazine, and so he started really picking up some notoriety. And there's no more proven way to be submitted as immortal than being portrayed as yourself on The Simpsons, which he was. So this is after his fighting career, but his celebrity was such that it got him a role on Dancing with the Stars. So it's legit.
He danced, or he was one of the judges?
Brother, he danced, and I kid you not, one of the dancing numbers he did ended with him doing his signature pose that he would do when he won fights in the octagon. Joe, do you remember this?
I have legitimately think you're making this up. No clue what you're talking about here. No idea. I suddenly feel terribly unprepared. I could have binged this whole thing if I knew. I'm very excited about this. Okay.
Yeah, I'll have to find it and send it to the group here. But for the purposes of his fighting career, at this point, Chuck is established as the guy in the UFC. And for the next two and a half years would undoubtedly be the draw that the company had. When Chuck fought, it felt like an event. And, Joe and Steve revisiting this now, his run isn't that long.
No.
He defends the title 4 times, which, at the time was kind of a big deal. But now, Jesus Christ, John Jones had the belt for 20 years, it seems like. So Chuck's run here was meteoric and pretty much came to a crash and burn at the end there.
Mm-hmm. A lot of it's the style, right? Like it felt more significant because of the way he was winning fights and the highlight reel knockouts. And I think also the fact that there was so much groundwork there with the Tito feud and the Randy trilogy. By the time he was cemented as a top star, it wasn't like he was a fresh face. Like recently we saw Alex Pereira, he kind of just emerged as the top star of the UFC. Mm-hmm. With Chuck, I think it was a more gradual ascent, and then when he was there, the people he'd already earned their heart. He just was getting new fans. But certainly it is different, and I think in hindsight that's not surprising because his style probably wasn't built to sort of sustain dominance necessarily.
Yeah, that's Julio. Just what we're talking about here is the way he beat Randy Couture is essentially how he fought everyone, which was just, well, they're going to punch me, I'll just take it, and then I punch harder. Yeah, very quickly.
Is he... Because if I recall correctly, you were talking about how Randy was kind of an icon already going into this, and he was, Captain America. And I get the feeling that even to this day, he is, right? Like, he has like a place in history that maybe Chuck doesn't have, or are they on the same level for people that
Well,
aficionados
it's actually funny you asked that. That was one of the questions I was going to kind of circle back to. So give me just a minute here. Let's finish up with Chuck. We'll get to Randy and we'll come back to it.
Jumping ahead of the professor's notes here.
So excited. So excited.
I am the student that's like raising his hand before they even ask for questions.
This is what happened in our Rock Cena thing when we did the CM Punk episode. And then Julio was vaguely like familiar with the idea of AEW. And he's like, well, will he go to AEW? And I was like, oh, hold on. Don't get ahead of ourselves here.
If only you knew the layers ahead of you there. My goodness.
So Chuck Liddell, after beating Randy Couture, the idea then becomes he's avenged one of 3 losses he's had in his career. So the promotional tactic becomes, well, let's see him avenge another loss. So in his next fight, he fights Jeremy Horn, who is a hell of a journeyman in the sport of MMA. But at that point in time, and summer of 2005, had no business fighting Chuck Liddell. That is, I believe, the weekend I moved to Denton for college. That's when I started my first semester at UNT. And I remember watching that fight at the immortal and legendary Denton Hooters. It was like, a turn away at the door because Chuck was fighting. So people were just like peering through the window trying to see a TV what was going to happen. Following that, they complete the trilogy with Randy Couture. Randy makes it to the second round. He altered his game plan in the third fight. He did try to implement his wrestling a bit more, but Steve, Joe, and I had talked about this previously. At this point in the game, if you got Chuck down, he still would just like stand up, like you couldn't do anything with him.
All right. A few minutes ago, I was somewhat scolded for calling Chuck Liddell a white trash icon. And then you're going to tell me he drew a turnaway crowd at the Denton, Texas Hooters? I mean, the evidence is mounting without me even having to say a word. But to your point about Chuck's fighting style, yeah, you could get him down, but he was just like the Barney meme from The Simpsons where you throw him out of the bar and he's right behind you. That's how Chuck fought. He just kept coming back. Standing up, he would take the punch and just keep moving forward, and being taken down, he would find a way to emerge like Jason Voorhees and drag you off that boat.
Julio, some of the fights we watched, you saw like what the ground game looks like. When Chuck was in his prime, this happened with Randy, and it happened with another one of his famous title defenses. They just shoot and take him down, and he would just stand up like one of those ragdoll toys that you hit the button and it goes limp, and then you just like it regenerates. So that's what happened here. He knocks out Randy Couture again. This moves along to a fight with Hanato Babalu Sobral, who Joe probably had the most idiotic game plan of anyone that ever fought Chuck Liddell.
He did, but this is my one time to do this on a platform of note. I recently, in passing in an MMA conversation with someone, said just the name Babalu. And they looked at me like I'd just switched languages and was like telling them about, science. And so I really, you're correct, but it's a shame how some guys completely fall through the cracks of history. Babalu was a really good fighter, and that was a good win, man. Even if, yes, he like charged into the flames there. Playing with fire is one thing, but sort of reveling in them is another.
Yeah, the old heads thought like Babalu was the favorite. I think some places even had him as a betting favorite.
It was a big win, man. Really big win.
Yeah, but Chuck put him out. That moves us along to the first million buy pay-per-view that the UFC did, if I'm remembering correctly, and that is UFC 66, Tito Ortiz and Chuck Liddell, the rematch, in which Tito lasted longer, but probably to his detriment because he took a fucking ass beating in that fight. So Chuck Liddell the stock continues to rise, to grow. Then we come to basically the turning point in the career of one Chuck Liddell, where the storyline is going to continue, where he's going to avenge the only loss he has remaining, that being against Quentin Rampage Jackson of Pride Fighting Championship fame, and more importantly, in Contrarian's lore, of the A-Team fame. And it was UFC 71. I watched this at the Denton Hooters as well.
This is before or after the Rampage fight we saw on the Green Along?
This is before, because remember how Rampage came into that fight as the champion?
Okay. Doesn't bode well for
he won it. And it basically is what we just talked about. Chuck tried to fight Rampage the same way he had fought everybody, and Rampage is a different beast, man. And it was not long into the fight. Chuck just left his hands down. Rampage slipped a punch. Good night, Chuck Liddell. And everyone kind of chalked it up to, well, the star power had gone to his head. He'd been partying too much, and he got caught. That's a popular phrase, Julio, of when I don't feel like I really lost. I just got caught. But this was the turning point, like I said. In his next fight, Chuck Liddell, which was basically like a layup, they made a fight with him and a gentleman by the name of Keith Jardine, who, to say his chin was suspect would be a massive understatement. The idea was Chuck's going to come out, knock out this big dude, and, he's going to be back. In a very hilarious pro wrestling twist, the idea of this fight was, if Chuck Liddell wins, it's going to create a fight with Wanderlei Silva, who was like an all-time dream fight at that point in time. Chuck lost, and they still just made the fight anyway afterwards. Like, fuck it. We already printed the posters. We got to do this.
Did he lose because was he not prepared? Was he overconfident? What was the excuse this time?
Well, I was just about to say, Steve, I don't know if you remember this fight, or Joe, if you want to jump in, but essentially what happened is Keith Jardine just relied on leg kicks, and Chuck Liddell had no idea what to do with that.
Similar to that Quentin fight that we watched on the Grin Along. Once you lose that powerful base, if you don't know how to work around that, you're getting your shit wrecked every time.
Yeah. And Jardine had a very unique style too. Very unique. And something that would kind of emerge as a trend in his career, he would kind of fight up to his level of competition often too. Jardine could fight a journeyman and be in real danger of being knocked out. If you give him a big time fight, he would often, with game planning of Jackson and such, he would kind of rise to the occasion, which we'd see later with the aforementioned Rampage in a later main event. So it's less surprising now, but at the time, as you mentioned, he was like handpicked as a guy to get knocked out by Chuck Liddell, and it did not turn out that way.
Like I said, the fight did go on as planned with Wanderlei Silva, and this was like the last moment of Chuck Liddell's career, December 29th, 2007. UFC 79, regarded as one of the greatest UFC events of all time. Julio, I'm being sincere in this. I'm not trying to take a dig. But I'm trying to put it on terms that like you can kind of relate to. The idea of this fight was basically what you probably felt going into Endgame of like, there's no way this can live up to my level of expectation.
That's hilarious. Like, oh, here comes a Marvel reference, and he did.
Or Spider-Man No Way Home or what have you. But the point being, Joe and Steve, I know you guys know what I'm talking about. This fight was like mythical before it even happened. And the way it played out, it delivered kind of in a way that it was even better than we could have like prophesized.
Yes, very much. It was the ultimate, who will fall first in terms of the way both guys fought, these kind of marauding brawlers, right? Like obviously Chuck had a little more depth to his game. Wanderlei really was just marauding brawlers, especially by this point. As we've mentioned, both guys slightly declined, but they gave you the exact fight you were looking for. And for Chuck, it was kind of, especially in hindsight, while he wasn't what he was previously, it was a very fitting note to kind of encapsulate his career, I think, and that makes what we're about to talk about kind of less fun, but an awesome fight, a classic fight, and a fight that was, God, what we're looking at that point, 5 or 6 years in the making, right? Because the Grand Prix was, at one point, that was where they expected them to fight in the final, so yeah, a classic fight for sure.
Probably should have just ended the story here, but as we've said on this very podcast, what we do, the story never ends. So we have to move it along here. Little under a year later, Atlanta, Georgia, UFC 88, Chuck Liddell fights Rashad Evans, Rashad Evans is a name that'll come back up at the end of this. He won the second season of The Ultimate Fighter and went on to be a world champion and a star in his own right. And this was the thing that kind of catapulted him to another level of stardom. In the second round of the fight, knocked out Chuck Liddell. And I mean, I've seen guys die from knockouts, and it was not unlike that. Chuck Liddell got caught with an overhand right. The sound it made, I can still hear. And Steve, we had seen Chuck at this point get knocked down. Rampage TKO'd him. But this, shut the lights off, and he was not moving for several minutes after this.
Yeah, I think this was the point where even Dana was like openly saying, "You need to stop fighting.
Yeah.
You're my cash cow, but you're also my friend, and I don't want to see you die out there." Just to give you a kind of a broader encapsulation of just how severe these ass kickings were getting near the end of Chuck's run.
That's the rare moment of humanity from Dana White, or was he doing it for the cameras?
That was a one-off collector's item for us to cherish for the rest of time.
It continued as he fought Mauricio Shogun Hua at UFC 97 in 2009, knocked out in the first round. And then at UFC 115, he was supposed to have a trilogy fight with Tito Ortiz, but Tito pulled out at the last minute. And he fought longtime contender Rich Franklin, and again was knocked out cold in the first round. One of those, it's it wasn't that he was like dead on the ground. It was one of those weird ones where he's like lifting his head and looking around, but his limbs aren't working. It was a very uncomfortable one.
That was, in some ways, I found that to be the saddest one, in the sense that he actually, from a performance point of view, had a real positives in that fight and made a really good start against a genuinely good fighter. And that was more than any of the other stoppages an example of like his chin has gone. Because it was a short shot. Like the Rashad shot was a massive bomb, right? Regardless of, decline. The Rich Franklin one was like, okay, he can't fight anymore. He can't take a shot at all anymore.
Yeah, that was Meltzer's read of the situation at the time. The Rashad shot would have taken anybody down.
Right.
But the Franklin shot, that was just, the old Chuck would have walked through 5 of those and been ready to go.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we're in the combat sports industry after all, and there's some scumbags that run about. And it would be 8 years later that Oscar De La Hoya decided that he wanted to run an MMA event that would be headlined by the trilogy fight between Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz. Julio, because I am demented and into this game too deep, I found a stream that night to watch it because I just wanted to see what was going to happen. And Joe or Steve, have you seen it? It's one of the sadder things.
It looked like he weekends at Bernie when he came back to life.
Oh, God.
It did, honestly, yeah. It's the craziest thing is that's not a reach. That's actually what it looked like, yeah.
Stiff and not very lifelike. He could barely move. Yeah, it was horrendous.
And the week of had the situation where they showed him hitting pads and the heavy bag, and he looked so bad that people convinced themselves he was bluffing, like it was a bit, and he was going to snap into motion. And as soon as he came out for the first round, it was very apparent to everyone, including Tito, he was a dead man walking. He had nothing to offer. It's probably among the most washed guy, like a guy has ever looked in a cage, right? In a ring, anything. Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah.
I wonder if that won the Wrestling Observer most disgusting. What is it? Most disgusting promotional tactic?
Yes. That was probably like a lexical knife fat or something that year.
Touche. A sad end for Chuck Liddell, someone who, it's almost like you would write in a novel or like a fucking movie of someone at one point in time who was such like a gladiator almost, to be dramatic. And then he's just like this frail old man that ends his fighting career. And, Julio, we watched that reunion piece that we'll get back to, but you can tell there, and especially now, his speech pattern's all fucked up. And it's, it's a bummer because even though I'm not sure he and I would see eye to eye on many social issues or anything, he's still someone that was a big figure in the sports world and, my teen years and whatnot. And to see what he's become now, it's a bummer. And he was like a superstar. He was. It's just a classic example of a guy who didn't know when to walk away. And again, this ain't fucking baseball. Like what he's doing is getting punched in the head. And he ended his career, winning one fight out of, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4. He won 1 out of 7. And the 5 of those, were by knockout. And it was an unfortunate end. So leave the memories alone. In your mind, Julio, you're lucky because you can just think of Chuck taking a nap on a recliner as Team Blue carries him across the waters.
Sadly, I'm going to think of Weekend at Bernie's. Thanks to Steve. That was a very vivid image.
I just looked it up. The most disgusting promotional tactic was WWE doing business with the Saudis.
Well, I want to concede my prior comment on.
You mentioned the reunion video, Alex. So when he's talking about a fight that he's getting ready for in that video, that is the
Weekend at Bernie's
fight.
Yep.
Oh God,
that's the one.
So there's a 30. Do you know what 30 for 30 is, Julio?
Yeah. We've talked about it a few times. That's where
that's
did
right.
the OJ one, right?
Yeah. So there is a 30 for 30 that was made on specifically the Ortiz-Liddell feud, and its like centerpiece it ends with their third fight, and it's like all of the documentary tropes of like how depressing it is, how low the crowd, like the attendance was, how bad the buy rate was. So it's all sad at the end. And like, if I remember correctly, their payouts weren't even like, it was not like Chuck got $1 million. I think he got like 300,000 or something. And yeah, it was just bad news all the way around. On the other side of the coin though, and you would think having lost the big fight that we're talking about here, there's Randy Couture, who, man, you want to talk about a guy who was a cat, it seemed, in the world of mixed martial arts, who just 9 lives, as they say. Got knocked out by Chuck-Liddell, came back, fought Mike Van Arsdale, choked him out in a fight that built to the trilogy fight with Chuck-Liddell. He got knocked out there again. He announces his first, maybe at this point, second or third retirement, and steps away for about a year from the sport of mixed martial arts, and then returns at UFC 68 to fight the then reigning heavyweight champion of the world, Tim Sylvia. Just a tall, lengthy, big, dumb son of a bitch that guy was. And Randy, so I said heavyweight, Julio, so he bumped up in weight. And the initial thought of this was kind of like a freak show fight. And Joe, the time of recording this is pretty fitting because it's not on the same level of George Foreman versus Michael Moore, but it definitely feels like an MMA equivalent to that, wouldn't you say? Yeah,
and it's I think it's one of the coolest pieces of MMA history, and I mean that sincerely, Team Couture bits aside. The story goes that Randy, as a retired fighter, was watching Tim Sylvia and Arlovsky's third fight and was like, I can beat this guy, man. And he texted Dana White and said, I can beat Tim Sylvia. And Dana took him seriously, and next thing you know, there was a contract in front of him. Because he was just hanging around as a retired fighter. And as Alex mentioned, Sylvia was a huge guy. And the general kind of sentiment was this was a ridiculous fight that Randy was going to very much regret. And in fear of getting ahead of myself, the opening kind of dramatic moment in that fight with the early knockdown is one of the loudest reactions anything in UFC history has ever seen. I mean, it was electric. So that's when I would truly become Team Couture, I think, looking back on it. Because that was a special thing, very special.
It really was. And, he was coming off a loss, and I rewatched the Michael Moore, George Foreman fight the other night when the news of Foreman's passing hit. And God bless Larry Merchant. He talks in the opening about that. He's like, most people aren't taking this fight seriously. Foreman hasn't fought in a year. He's coming off a loss, but he is a star. And with stardom, like age, comes privileges. And so that's kind of where Randy was here with the title shot that he got against Tim Sylvia. Yeah. Joe laid it out perfectly. Bell rings. Randy comes out, throws an overhand right from below his asshole, man, at Tim Sylvia. Has no defense, gets punched in the head. And the reaction is such that on the commentator mics, they're redlining because it's picking up so much of the noise around them. It's crazy. But he dominates Tim Sylvia for 5 rounds. And Randy Couture is once again the UFC heavyweight champion. He, at that point, because I don't think BJ Penn had yet. He was the only 2-division champion the UFC had ever had. So, legendary. During this time, the Ultimate Fighting Championship acquired Pride Fighting Championship. They picked it up and were bringing over some of the fighters that they had. And it seemed as though the intention was to do an interpromotional heavyweight showdown between Randy Couture and one of the true standouts from Pride Fighting, Mirko Filipovic, also known as Mirko Cro Cop. Steve, is there a more YouTube highlight reel fighter than Mirko Cro Cop?
Before I had ever seen a fight, I would see Cro Cop's name as the banner on the old WrestlingObserver.com website. And I would see pictures of what the hell is going on with this guy? But yeah, you described him perfectly. He's a highlight reel, especially in those days.
a true feared kickboxer. And so, it was a classic UFC style matchup was going to be the grappler against the kickboxer. So to set this up, they were going to have a rising contender named Gabriel Gonzaga fight Mirko Krokop. To give you an idea of how their relationship with Spike TV was, this was, about 2 years after the first season of The Ultimate Fighter. They aired a would-be pay-per-view for free on Spike TV. This was a big deal. And as plans will go awry. Gabriel Gonzaga switched the script on everybody, knocked out Mirko Krokop with Krokop's own move, the head kick. We talked about Rashad and Chuck just a minute ago, but also one of the more horrifying knockouts, Julio, because Krokop gets hit in the head, body shuts off ragdolls, and then his leg completely folds the wrong way underneath him. So like his ankles turned 180 degrees backwards. Joe, it's a startling image, and it's more startling that I guess just because his body was limp, Krokop didn't shred his leg.
Yeah, it's one of the very few knockouts, because when you watch a lot of legitimate fighting, you kind of get, it's like whatever at some point. Still to this day, when I watch that knockout, I do not check out the replay where they have the slow-mo of his leg, because it's just gross. Even though he was fine in that regard, obviously not as much elsewhere. But yeah, that was a huge kind of shift for the heavyweight division, and the heavyweight division was in for kind of an unexpected route, and that was I think a big part of continuing the trend of what Randy had done with Silver in terms of all plans out the window. It's chaos right now.
So this Gonzaga kid is thought to be the new bad boy on the block, so they set up him versus Randy, and in classic Randy fashion, beats the absolute dog shit out of Gabriel Gonzaga. It's one of those fights that he's so much bigger than Randy, but Randy just does Captain America shit, takes him down, punches him in the face on the feet. He's quicker than he's expecting him to be. So Randy at this point, again, is just oh. Following this, one of many disputes Randy would have publicly with the Ultimate Fighting Championship and his contract. So Randy is out of the game for about a year and a half. During that time, they found an interim heavyweight championship that Antonio Nogueira picks up. To unify these titles, Randy Couture ends up coming back into the fray at the end of 2008 to fight a young man by the name of Brock Lesnar. Whoever wins that will unify with Nogueira. That's how it went down. Randy tried, even got an ankle pick on Brock at one point, but I don't think, Steve, it's outlandish to say that Brock probably outweighed him by 50 to 60 pounds on the night of the fight.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but Randy fought around 225, 230, I believe. And Brock was cutting to get to 265.
Yeah.
So he was probably closer to 290 walking into the cage. It was, and he just has those crazy fundamentals as far as the wrestling goes. He's an absolute beast of a man. What he lacked in overall well-rounded technique, he made up for it in just raw strength in the wrestling skill. And those damn literally hammer punches. He looked like he was trying to hammer a nail into the ground when he would get on top of a guy.
When he's wrestling, in pro wrestling, is he a bad guy? He's a bad guy, right?
Brock Lesnar?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a complicated story there, but
I know they kind of they go back and forth, but overall, kind of with The Rock, you think The Rock's a bad guy. With Cena, you think the Cena's a good guy. With this guy, he's a bad guy. That's
for sure, bad guy. Yeah.
The quintessential image of Brock Lesnar is with his manager Paul Heyman, and he's crushing dudes, he's just killing smaller guys than him. That's he's the Hulk essentially.
Okay.
Another Marvel
Captain
reference
America
for you
versus
there.
Hulk.
Pretty much.
And Cap lost. That's
so Cap. Yeah, Randy lost here. He lost his next fight to Antonio Nogueira after Nogueira lost the interim title. So at one point in time, the would-be title fight. Great fight though. It's a pretty funny fight of just two old dudes just saying fuck it and swinging. From there, he went on a 3-fight win streak, beat Brandon Vera, Mark Coleman, and huge pop James Toney, championship boxer who thought he'd give the UFC a try, and he didn't know how to tap out. That's always what I remember. Randy comes out, ankle picks him. This dude has no idea what he's doing. Randy gets him in a choke, and James Toney just starts waving at the referee. Help me. I don't know what to do.
Did Toney have boots on too for that fight?
He didn't have boots, but I remember his ass was out. He didn't get
his ankle and feet were taped up a ton. Yeah. But
he got paid for it. And in the final fight of his MMA career, Randy Couture fought Lyoto Machida at UFC 129 at the Skydome in Toronto. Lost due to one of the only flying front kicks I've ever seen land in MMA. Randy, he went out on his shield. He was a pretty close fight. He got some good shots off on Machida. Just The difference here is we're looking at a Randy Couture with a 19-11 record, and Chuck Liddell, conversely, had a 21-9 record. But when Randy chose to step away here, Joe, I think even with all those losses, I don't know about you, to me, Randy now at this point has a more like endearing legacy and career as a fighter than Chuck does.
Yeah, I think there are complications due to the way that Chuck and Randy's relationship with the UFC is so contrasting. And that complicates it for younger folks who aren't as familiar with Randy's story. To me, he retired with a lot of dignity because Machida, if you remember the story behind that, he handpicked Machida because he was intrigued if he could solve the puzzle. It was a horrible matchup. He picked it specifically like, I want to see if I can do this at this point in my life. To see if I can shock people again. And he couldn't, but that felt very different to kind of like, you mentioned earlier, the Rich Franklin fight. That was supposed to be Tito again. Because that was the one guy they were like, okay, Chuck can surely beat Tito. That's a very different feel. To me, certainly, yes. I think Randy aged very gracefully as a fighter. Unfortunately, the aforementioned disputes with the UFC, has left us at a point now where he's like never mentioned on their broadcasts anymore. That's obviously ridiculous and embarrassing, but it has a real effect. Like when I talk to my friends who are younger fans, they have very little reverence for Randy Couture, which is unfathomable, I think, to our MMA generation,
Absolutely. And Julio, kind of made reference to these differences of opinion, I guess you could say, he had with the UFC. He was one of the guys that, a first big name that was like, fuck this, you're not paying me enough. Or a big thing was likeness rights. He signed on to do this video game that wasn't a UFC game because he's like, fuck you, we're independent contractors. I don't owe you my likeness. And then, just because he did that, Dana White's like, oh, he sucked. He's always sucked. He's, overrated. He would go to different promotions and do things like commentary or coaching and whatnot. And because of that, he wasn't loyal, I guess. And so, like Joe said, now, when you listen to the commentary or the presentation of the UFC's history, Randy Couture is not in there like he should be. It's Steve, it's almost like, the years of Bruno erasure. If you know what you're talking about, you know what's going on here. But to Joe's point, like he said, people take their version of history seriously. And I guess history is written by the winners,
Yeah, Randy Couture and Frank Shamrock are in that boat together.
Yeah.
But Chuck is in the history book still?
Yeah.
Oh,
very much.
Chuck's, he's, cage side at all the big fights. They're like, there's the greatest human being that's ever lived, that type of shit. So worked out for Randy, though, I think, as he took the next step in his career, moved on to acting, and a lot of straight to DVD products he made, which, you get what you get with those. But he was also a star in the Expendables, and those movies both made, like the first two, both made like $300 million and were sizable happenings at the time of their release. And if you've never seen the second Expendables, after you listen to this, that's the first thing you should do, because that movie fucking rules. Jean-Claude Van Damme's the bad guy, and his last name's Villon. I mean, come on, dude.
Is Randy a good guy or a bad guy?
Oh, Randy's a good guy. His name's Toll Road, I think is what his name is in those movies.
It's like a G.I. Joe.
And the first one is when someone says the word unusual, and he goes, "Are you talking about my ear?" or something like that. They bring up his cauliflower ear. Being left out of certain versions of history, I don't think Randy Couture is the type of guy that particularly bothers. And so, he's comfortable. He knows his legacy. We know his as well. But a big part of it was being, the coach of Team Green here on the first season of The Ultimate Fighter. So what of the UFC itself, the Ultimate Fighting Championship? I can tell you comfortably a lot would happen after this. The closest big news I can say is what I mentioned earlier is in 2007, they acquired Pride Fighting Championship. A lot of different schools of thought on that. I jokingly said, Julio, on a previous episode that Pride was funded by organized crime. I don't think the end of Pride Fighting really goes out of its way to disprove that. There was a lot of financial issues. And according to Dana White, the original idea was they were going to buy Pride and run it as a separate promotion. This is also what Vince McMahon said he was going to do with WCW when he bought it. Both of these ideas lasted about 30 seconds. And then Dana just basically went through the roster and picked and chose who they wanted to bring over and then whose contracts they were going to buy out. Joe, is Mark Hunt the only one that they didn't want that was like, nope, I'll fight, pennies on the dollar?
That was a fascinating situation because he actually came in years later, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because he fought in Dream in the meantime. I don't know why that was the case, but yeah, he came in with like a losing record and then had this incredible kind of Cinderella man run. And believe it or not, he also ended up in a contract dispute with the UFC. But which I guess ruined another happy story there as I brought that up. But nonetheless, yeah, I think he's the only one. Yeah.
During the course of the 2010s, after Pride, the UFC merged with the WEC. They purchased an organization called Strikeforce. They're basically just fucking this amorphous blob that's absorbing things that get close to them at this point. And in 2016, this is the famed $4 billion sell that I had referenced several times throughout. The UFC's parent company, Zuffa, was in talks to sell for $4 billion, and this was to WME. And they eventually became Endeavor. The UFC eventually were they bought out, Joe, or did they merge with TKO?
I have no idea. I try to avoid stories like this for all costs. I have no clue. Was TKO not like just the group they called it now?
Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So following the sale, an immediate partnership with ESPN was formed, which at the very end of this we'll circle back to because it's kind of turned into a bit of an LOL. But this led to pretty much what brings us to today when Endeavor merged with the global branded streaming flywheel vehicle platform, the World Wrestling Federation, to form a new publicly traded company, TKO. And this partnership was announced the day after WrestleMania 39. Is that correct, Steve? Is that when Vince showed up with that fucking Vincent Price mustache?
Yeah, as we were collectively nursing our wounds with Cody not being able to finish his story. Like, oh yeah, by the way, fuck you guys. We're also selling the company.
They formed a united outfit of evil.
It's really what it felt like. You know, it's I was in the hotel bar there I was in my room in LA, and you know, when it's the fucking ticker hit, UFC merges with WWE, like a bolt of lightning hit the hotel. I was like, oh God, this is it. This is the end of times. In the course of the 20 years since the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, Julio, I ran through that very quick, but the UFC just keeps trucking along. They buy up all of their competition. They're bought out for an initial $4 billion. The Fertittas, who we see one of them in the show, remember when he has to come in to solve the Koscheck-Lieben dispute? Yeah. They're sitting pretty with their money. So fortunes certainly changed. We're a long ways away from the 40 million in the hole that they were in, 2004. So I think it's safe to say the Ultimate Fighter helped them out. I did note, though, that during this time they were in acquisition mode, just buying up all their competition. And some of the fighters did not care for this. One of which was Nate Rock Quarry, who was one of 3 fighters on December 16th of 2014 that filed a class action lawsuit against Zuffa and the UFC, alleging the UFC participated in anti-competitive practices that hindered fighters and their mixed martial arts careers. This was alongside Kung Lee and John Fitch, which, I mean, it is a monopoly, but what are you going to do about it?
You got to fight
this
the
motherfucker
power.
Literally has the president of the United States in his back pocket. I don't know what you're going to do about it, man.
Nate Quarry will stand strong.
Joe, do you remember when this happened first?
Yes, I do. I remember the UFC loyalists pushing back on it too. Like, how can there be a monopoly? Bellator's allowed to run. It's like, well, yes, in the literal, but it's very obvious what they've done. And also around this time frame, what year would you say, Alex, it was when they jumped, their schedule transformed? Because once upon a time, they would do, maybe an event every month, maybe. And so in between the UFC shows, MMA fans would be wanting more. They would watch other promotions.
Yeah.
Now in 2025, there's no room for other promotions because there's a UFC show every single week. In every which way, they've stomped out the market. You could actually get good fighters. We could start a promotion tomorrow, God forbid, and get a ton of good fighters. When are they going to watch us? They have the UFC on every single week. It's it's been a gradual thing, and now it's, really evident. But yeah, I remember this whole storm at the time.
It's whenever the Dana White Contender Series started, which I think was like mid 2010s, that like it seemed like UFC was having shows that were running like 3 days a week. So Julio, the UFC, I believe the matter was settled out of court or dismissed, but the UFC was forced to pay $375 million to relevant fighters over the antitrust lawsuit that was filed back in 2014, which again, Nate Quarry was on this. And I remember his post that day was something like, yeah, it should be a lot more. We won, but we didn't really win, because Nate Quarry had a bit of an interesting UFC run himself. Coming off the injury on The Ultimate Fighter, he beat Ludin Kincaid on the finale via nasty body shot that it's one of those slow motion ones that like ripples throughout. But he went on after The Ultimate Fighter to knock out Shoney Carter. He finished Pete Sell. And then he was set up to fight Rich Franklin for the middleweight title at UFC 56. This was the follow-up to the second season of The Ultimate Fighter. Way overmatched. I don't know why they put Nate Quarry in this fight against Rich Franklin. Julio, it's one of those like highlight reel knockouts that for years they used in all the openings of the television shows. And it was not a good day at the office for Rock Quarry. Fought Pete Sell again, Caleb Starnes in Canada. He lost to Damian Maia. Racked up a few more wins before finishing his career in 2010. He had a slew of injuries and different problems that led to him not really being able to cut the mustard.
Could they all be traced to that original injury in Ultimate Fighter, and he always blamed Randy for it?
If this was pro wrestling, yes. But I was looking into what he was like getting into outside of suing the UFC for millions of dollars. He came out later in life that he was raised by Jehovah's Witnesses and like basically became someone that spoke out against that type of upbringing. And because he was cast away from his family when he went off to do what he wanted to do with his life. And this led me, of course, down a rabbit hole. And I found that he was on Leah Remini had a talk show about the dangers of religion, you know, this being after she got out of Scientology. And Nate Quarry's on one of these talking about the dangers of, you know, being raised as a Jehovah's Witness. And he comes across as like very intelligent. And Joe had mentioned this. I think we found the one smart MMA fighter throughout this process. And he was a guy who knew when to step away from his career, because he retired in 2010 and guys were getting too good, because he was fun to watch, but he was a big lumbering dude. So he seems to have adapted pretty well in a post-Ultimate Fighter life, and now is, you know, doing motivational speeches and whatnot. And he still talks freely about his time on The Ultimate Fighter. But yeah, part of me wants him to blame Randy for everything that's gone wrong.
Dude, you had that dramatic pause after you said he came out, and I thought that you meant that he came out. I was like, suddenly everything clicked with the Chris Lieben relationship in the show. It was like, oh my, we were watching a love story, a real love story happen. No, okay, well, I'm glad he's doing okay.
Along to one of our semifinalists, Mike Quick Swick. Joe, he had a pretty damn good UFC career following The Ultimate Fighter.
Very exciting style too. Very exciting.
As he was dubbed, of course, Mike Quick Swick with his knockout of Alex Schonauer on the finale. That stuck with him because the next several fights he won were all within, you know, the first half of the first round. His first big roadblock was Yushin Okami, who was just way, way too big for him. And he immediately dropped down to welterweight after that and worked his way up to where he got into a title contention fight, which he was beat by Joe's countryman, Dan Hardy. From there, kind of a spotty back and forth, went on to become a trainer, even opened up a school in Thailand, which is documented in the little reunion we watched. But it was last year, 2022, he announced that he was diagnosed with cancer and he had stage 4 leukemia. But he's since come back from that and is, as of today, cancer-free. Nice. So an interesting story. He was part of that American Kickboxing Academy team, right? With like Koscheck and Fitch.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's been someone, and I'm not going to pretend to have followed his story closely, but generally has been a pretty positive representative of the sport, I think it's fair to say. And his story actually loops back around with Diego's later, which I'm sure we'll get to. But yeah, he was a really fun fighter. The Dan Hardy fight actually surprised me, the result of that. I thought he was going to win that fight. As usual, I was going against the Brit there. But he didn't. But he was a good fighter, very, very fun. And fun to watch. Those blistering hand speed he had was a treat for sure.
What if he got the cancer from that television that was in the ground, getting shit spilled all over it for months on end?
Just emitted radiation while they're watching Frank Trigg fight.
The black mold took him when they brought that sumbitch up to surface level.
Many could say the main event as we move on to Sam Hoger here, who, of course, beat Bobby Southworth in the Ultimate Fighter finale. His next fight in the UFC would be against Stephan Bonner at Ultimate Fight Night. He would lose that fight by decision. He went on to win one more fight in the UFC, and then, I don't know if we knew quite then, but in hindsight, a hell of a task here in back-to-back fights against Rashad Evans and Lyoto Machida, which he lost both of those by decision. He went to a split decision with Rashad, so did enough to at least convince one person. Ended up fighting until 2010. Like a lot of these guys, ended up opening his own school, but the acting bug got Sam Hoger as well. I think all those dramatic line readings into the camera really stuck with him, and he wanted to do something with it. Unfortunately, it's not like he was starring in any Scorsese films or anything like that, but I was reading, there is a short film from 2021 called As Luck Would Have It, where he's on the poster and he plays a character named Detective Bach, which I may have to check out. And he also plays Freddie Palmer in Axe Grinder 4, Souls of Blood, and Axe Grinder 5, Blood Vengeance.
So he survives Axe Grinder 4.
Spoiler alert. There you go. You have to credit your own research, Alex, too. You uncovered the fact that he almost welcomed Rampage Jackson to the UFC, which has been on my mind since you told me that, honestly. That's an incredible what if for us to live with.
I forgot all about that. Like, yeah, I found a post that was like from the Wayback Machine, and it was rumoring that Sam Hoger was going to be Rampage Jackson's UFC debut fight, and Sam Hoger may not have gone on to make it to Axe Grinder 5 if he had fought Rampage Jackson.
Hey, he stole the beanies and he would have stole the show.
He does have a role as an extra in Grudge Match, which we have covered on the podcast. He's credited as Puking Boxer, and he was he was credited as Sam Hoger Jr. So I'm imagining that's the stage name he was going to go with. Sam Hoger, yeah, and he winds up still, I mean, he's obviously doing work in some level of acting and running a school. A guy, by the looks of it, in that reunion piece is pretty content with himself. And
I mean, he always was.
Oh, absolutely. He was very, very sure of himself. I was about to say that I think, but the level of MMA fandom are kind of just, you know, MMA does not have fans like myself, Joe, and Steve, the way like we have a community in wrestling where we take it so lightheartedly and can like really laugh and remember really outlandish happenings and characters and whatnot. If MMA fans had a bit of a more sense of humor, I really think Sam Hoger would be remembered as like one of the funnier kind of answers to a trivia question. You know, who stole all the shit on the first season of The Ultimate Fighter? Because we had a blast with his line delivery and just some of the things he said and his reaction to being called a thief. And so it's kind of a bummer Sam's not more widely remembered by the community, but that's certainly an industry of what have you done for me lately.
Are you, I know, I mean, that's not how it plays out with UFC, but still, I mean, you've referred to, like, for example, you said that Koscheck was the heel and Lieben was the babyface, even though I disagreed with that reading, but that was kind of like how they were presented, right? And Sam Hoger would have been the heel, right? Like we jokingly, said that he was kind of like the new villain in that second half when he was doing all that stuff. Does that mean, because he fought Bobby Southworth in the finale, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they pit two heels together? Like, would you say Bobby Southworth was also a heel on the show?
Yeah, I think Bobby was he was a heel on the show, but they present him as like a lesser of two evils in that matchup, I think.
So evil one, the evil one,
yeah.
and the
evil did not die tonight. And then the fight is bad enough that I think neither of them are villains by the end. They're just put with normal to see fight. That's what actually, because Sam Hogan could have been a money villain heel. I avoided industry terms after Julio had already done it for me. What am I doing? Anyway, he could have been a great heel, but his fighting style was horrible to watch. Remember on the show how he had that very unique demeanor and facial expression. Very interesting fella. But yeah, his fights were not very fun to watch, unfortunately.
So he doesn't like really, because I guess I brought it up because if you're saying that his legacy is not like, he's not remembered fondly as in, because you would point to, he was one of the fun bad guys, right?
Yeah.
Not even that.
So a thought came to my mind when Alex compared how wrestling fans can find someone who maybe wasn't great in the moment, but they had this goofy reference. And the case has been building ever since he said this, that this man allegedly walked around taking other people's stuff. He's got a goofy facial expression and mannerisms. He wasn't very good. He may be MMA's equivalent of the Repo Man. If people had more of a sense of humor about their craft.
Right. I mean, if you walk down the like wrestling toy aisle now, you just see a collection of bad gimmicks from yesteryear that we now just accept as part of our history. It's awesome, dude.
We need one of those like bootleg Sam Hoger shirts that it's like a collage of all these different pictures of him on it, you know, and then on the back it just says, "I'm not a thief." Bobby Southworth. What became of old Bobby here? After the loss to Sam Hoger on the Ultimate Fighter finale, he ended up going to Strikeforce, racking up some wins there. Vernon Tiger White, Anthony Ruiz. Ended up retiring from fighting in 2010. Joe, in my research for this shit blew my fucking mind. He showed back up and auditioned to be on the 11th season of The Ultimate Fighter.
Yes. And I don't care how washed he was or how much Dana White hated him. They are insane for not putting him on the show.
Absolutely, man.
What were they thinking, man? It was like such an easy hook and narrative. And he was also a character on the first show. He was a villain, as Julio mentioned. It was bizarre. When I read that, I couldn't believe he wasn't on the show.
He was also kind of the old man on the first season.
Yeah.
So for him to come back 10 seasons later, I don't know how strict they were with this stuff, but a lot of those shows have, like, if you're going to try out for the real world, you have to be like 21 to 26. Did he pull himself a boogeyman Marty Wright and show up with a fake ID?
His Instagram page, the bio, Bobby, this is first Strikeforce light heavyweight champ, star of the Ultimate Fighter. All caps.
Love it.
Bobby went on to, like a lot of these guys, I'm going to be saying this again, do some training. He ran a UFC gym in San Antonio. Based on his Instagram page, it looks like he's still into training. Just a more interesting character than I think his fight career would properly illustrate. And yeah, definitely one of the top heels in the territory here on the first season.
See, I understand why he's a heel. I want to relitigate this. But I mean, I don't know. They're all heels. They're all human. I don't know. I'm going to forget if I waited till the very end of this recap. So I have to ask you now. Obviously, training with Randy or training with Chuck would be out of the price range for, the average person. But if you are like an upcoming MMA fighter and you have your pick out of the contestants of the first season of Ultimate Fighter, who do you go to for training? Since that's what they all seem to be doing after.
And anyone on the cast, I'm
except for not the coaches. Is it from
yeah, of course, because otherwise you wouldn't have to ask me.
Not Diego. That's the first one.
Yeah.
I'll say that.
It's a really good question. My goodness, I'm now pondering the cast and trying to like rank them in intelligence in my mind. Kenny Florian's sharp.
Yeah.
Mike Swick, Nate Quarry, I'd say in that ballpark would be they're sharp guys. I would say by relatively speaking.
Koscheck would probably have vibes,
And I would go with Koscheck just because he was Chuck's right hand for so long. So surely he picked up on some of the tricks.
You guys are insane, man.
Just going to blast through a couple quick hits here on the cast for some of our less famous, I guess you would say, participants. Josh Rafferty went on to do some training, became a fitness guru. Alex Schonauer, who, jumping ahead to our reunion piece, looks arguably the best out of any of them. Went on to become a stuntman in Hollywood. I was looking up his credits on IMDb, did real shit. He's worked on multiple of the Transformers movies. He was coordinator of stunts on Star Trek Beyond. Most recently, the Beverly Hills Cop that came out last year.
Wow.
He worked in stunts on that. So made a nice little niche for himself. Alex Karalexis, I mean, he's still from Boston, if you couldn't tell. I actually located his LinkedIn page and was reading up that he has been working for Homes for Wounded Warriors, which is obviously a noble cause, but I did a bit more research into it. And in recent years, there's been alleged embezzling of funds and improper disbursement of money. So it certainly is a Boston real estate front. I'll say that much.
You had to keep digging.
And Chris Sanford, which I could not really find much of anything in terms of like a digital trail that he has. But according to that, according to Wikipedia, he fought one more time after his loss to Koscheck, and that was in 2005. And according to the reunion piece, he's the smartest one out of any of them because he got into trading and now owns a company that deals with wholesale businesses.
There you go.
And he's looking pretty sharp in that video too.
You sounded like one of the coaches then talking about Chris. I keep digging. I can't find anything here. There's nothing going on.
Were you disappointed that reunion video we didn't get a shot of Randy talking to Lieben and Sanford going like, my two Chris's back again?
I forgot to call on Kara Alexis's front two. I actually, more than any of those guys, I remember watching him fight after The Ultimate Fighter, years after The Ultimate Fighter. He was one of the guys that Anthony Pettis put away on his run to the title. So I guess a little footnote of history there. One thing that I remembered in my head, but during my research for this, it was almost an impossibility to find anything on this, to the point where I started gaslighting myself that I was making it up and that it just never happened. But in 2008, Spike TV did, like on a Saturday, they did an all-day marathon of The Ultimate Fighter. And in the commercial breaks, they brought in like half of the cast to do like a sit down and like a retrospective on what was going on and tell stories and whatnot. I could not find any video of it. I remember watching it like in real time. I found one article on MMA Junkie from August 31st, 2008 that actually documents this, but it was basically this Q&A hosted by Joe Rogan in between, during commercial breaks and, oh, what do you remember doing this type of thing? But there's two main things I remember from that. One, Lieben and Swick got into another shouting match where Swick said that Lieben was ducking him. And Joe, this might be too obscure a name. I don't even know if you'll remember it. He's like, yeah, you fucking ducked me so you could go fight Terry Martin. And and Lieben is like, I never ducked shit. And this situation escalates to the point where someone gets Joe Silva on speakerphone, who Joe Silva was a UFC matchmaker. And they go, hey, did Lieben turn down a fight with Mike Swick? And he just goes, oh, yeah. And then Lieben immediately he doesn't miss a beat. He's like, must have been my management team. I've never heard of this. And then the other big thing I remember from it, and this is confirmed in the piece that I read, Stefan told this insane story that I don't know why it hasn't been told more because it's so funny. Do y'all remember when he beat Swick in the semifinals afterwards? It showed them in the locker room, Team Green, and they were all doing like shots of Jack together.
Mm-hmm, of course. Yeah. I watch it every day.
So when they got back to the house, Stefan said he had like a buzz going and he was like, I don't have to fight again. I mean, I want to keep this going. But it was like there was no alcohol in the house. So the story is he's like, I'm going to go take a shower. So he went in the bathroom, turned the shower on, crawled out of the window in the bathroom and ran up the street to the gas station that was down the street from the house and bought a bottle of Mad Dog 20. And he said he chugged it on his run home just to keep the buzz going. And then he said he was gone for like an hour and a half. And when he came, like the shower had been running the whole time. And when he came out, everyone was looking at him like, what the fuck? So I'm sad I couldn't find the actual video to share with y'all, but that is, I will never forget watching that in my apartment in college and just laughing my ass off at that story. One thing I don't think we're going to laugh our ass off is where we're going next. And that is to the world of Strange Brew, Jason Thacker. As he had his fight against Chris Lieben on the Ultimate Fighter finale. And that was quite literally the last we heard of him for a decade. And it wasn't until, appropriately, this article came out 10 years ago tomorrow. And this was Chuck Mendenhall, and a very famous article on MMA fighting in search of Strange Brew. And Julio, because myself, Joe, and Steve have a bit more familiarity with the story here, I picked you to kind of read this and provide a recap for us. A very well-written piece, but kind of a bummer and definitely casts a bit of a shadow on how this show was put together.
No shit. This was... Look, I'd always been on Jason Thacker's side, I guess, from, what little we saw of him. I was very sympathetic to his cause in the sense that I just felt like that's probably the main reason I dislike Lieben through the run of that first season was because I just couldn't get past how much of an asshole he was to Thacker. And then reading this article, it was like, oh, it was even worse than the way that they describe how he ended up on the show with very little support. Just, he was on medication, but then they didn't bring his medication. It was just so rushed. And like he was already in a bad place in his life. And then The Ultimate Fighter made it worse. Not just like the experience of being there for however long he was, but also what happened after, because he came back to Canada, which always is painted as such a nice place, but it turns out that there's a lot of bad people in Canada that would just treat him like a pariah because he did not represent the country well in The Ultimate Fighter. It reads like such a train wreck, and the fact that, I mean, I'm guessing this is like an independent journalist digging all this up. It's not like the UFC. I don't know. They mentioned the UFC were looking for him too because they were toying with the idea of putting everybody from the first season in the Hall of Fame, right? And I'm like, but is that enough to make up for how you kind of ruined this guy's life? And I know, that you can probably make the argument of like personal responsibility and, well, how much of it, obviously the article is designed to paint him as just a victim of circumstances, an extreme victim of circumstances. But I don't know, man, it sounds like somebody that was taken advantage of ruthlessly and then discarded. And if this guy, the Chuck Mendenhall, hadn't gone looking for him, we wouldn't even know, it's like his life went to hell and, nobody would care. Like he is a punchline if you don't know this. He's just the guy that everybody made fun of, the guy that got disqualified first, like, booted off the show first. It's a bummer. It would make it even more of a bummer to watch those opening episodes of the season, knowing that this is just somebody that was didn't really know what he was getting into, and it wasn't disclosed to him, I guess, what he was getting into from the beginning. Yeah, it was a bummer reading this. I guess the upside is that, well, life goes on, and he kind of like, I mean, it still haunts him, obviously, but he moved past it in the sense that, he's still alive. He doesn't fight anymore, but he's still. It's wild that he lives in the same place that he lived back when he was recruited. Yeah. He even has some nice things to say about Chris Lieben, which is, It doesn't seem like he deserved at all everything that happened to him. And again, I know we're just going by what this article says, and it has like its own slant, but I don't know. I mean, do you guys know anything else beyond any more details beyond what this article says? Or this is it? This is like everything we know about Jason Thacker and his legacy.
That's pretty much everything I know. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's what made this piece when it came out. I remember it making kind of waves. It's like, oh shit, they found the dude that Chris Lieben's, pissed on his bed. And so,
but that's it. Like so nothing happened. Like obviously he said he wasn't interested in being inducted in the Hall of Fame.
Grew a hell of a beard.
Yeah. Yeah. It looks,
how insane is the part of the story that he gloved up to fight Dana White to prove that he could get sanctioned to fight in Las Vegas?
Do you think there's a video of that somewhere? The Dana White vault.
Dana doing the Ali shuffle, like dancing around this kid.
I like the idea that he didn't, like, he sees this bearded menace coming toward him and he doesn't recognize him, but then he catches a whiff and he's like, strange brew.
His nose is fucked up, right? That's what he says. And then eventually they reveal in the, as he's telling the story, that it's from one of the many, many bar fights that he's gotten into since The Ultimate Fighter Season 1, because everybody wants to pick a fight with him because they see him as this stain in Canadian legacy. And one time somebody took a pipe to his face, and that's why he has like the nose, the way he has it.
Steve, he's the kid who pissed his pants in 7th grade gym class, but never left his hometown. So that's all people know him as.
Oh, poor piss pants, Josh. No, man, it's like, it's rough. Even like Forrest obviously had a very, very well-renowned career. And in his book, he wrote about people would want to pick fights with him just to see how they fared against a professional fighter. And he tells a story about how he's in this bathroom, this nice restaurant, like slowly taking off his watch. Like, are you sure you want to do this? Because I'll fight you right here. And they did. They locked up and Forrest whacked the guy around a little bit and like, all right, are we done now? And then they went out and they bought shots and they had a good time. So I can only imagine the inverse of that, where the wish to fight is still there, but you have no respect for the other person as a human being. It sounds like this poor guy has been haunted for 20 years now of this Ultimate Fighter specter.
Joe, it's a really well-written piece, but I think it goes to it speaks overwhelmingly to the fucking massive bully mentality that Dana White and the UFC have always had.
Yeah, very much so. I think Julio's point is the most apt in the sense that if Chuck Mindenhall didn't do that article, it would just be like a lost piece of this glorious history they celebrate, right? And this kind of glossy, look at what they did for the sport. Look how innovative this was, how revolutionary it was. It's like that gives you a look at the actual kind of true makeup of the whole thing. Yeah, it sucks, dude. It's horrible.
What the writer posits here is that the only reason they put Thacker there was for contrast. Like basically they had 15 other guys that were trained MMA fighters, had a record, knew what they were more than everybody else. On the average, they knew somewhat what they were getting into, even if there were some surprises. Whereas like Thacker didn't know anything. And they were even, at some point, they told him, okay, you're not going to be on the show because we're cut back from 18 to 16. So he, I guess, stops training, goes back to his life, gets depressed or whatever. And then last minute, they bring him back because they're like, well, we did some drug testing. We've gotten rid of some people. So now you're number 16. And they just move in there last minute. So the charitable way of looking at it, it was like, well, they were just kind of making it up on the fly. So that's why they move him so quickly, leaves his medication behind, leaves his clothes behind. He doesn't have anything to wear because all his stuff has logos. So they give him like shitty clothes to wear. And again, the charitable way of looking at it is because it was so on the fly. That's why. The more sinister way of looking at it is like they specifically made sure that he was a character that was never going to fit because they just wanted to have that outsider that was going to be a loser in those first couple episodes, which is just even more damning. I mean, I think that's, it's like either incompetence in the way that you treated this guy or just downright malice because you set him up to fail in the worst possible way. So at that point, I wouldn't put it past him if somebody in the production team put it in Liebman's idea. Hey, you should go piss in that guy's bed because that we have to like sell that story. It's
I'll go to bed. The producer's like, all right, the last thing we want is anyone to piss on another guy's bed tonight. All right.
Here you go. Here's like a little bit of fire for my argument that Bobby Southworth is not such a bad guy. Unless this was planted, the article recalls that he is the one guy that, tried to give Thacker some props and tell him, hey, don't quit. We laughed at his. What did he tell him?
My joke was going to be Bobby read this article and went, well, he didn't want it bad enough. What do you want me to do about it?
Yeah, it's I agree. It's pretty well written, Alex. Because you can read a story like this and it keeps you interested because of the facts. But this dude, is he a big deal in the MMA circles, Chuck Mindenhall? Or is this his one?
He's a pretty big deal.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I say it with some hesitance because like he's someone whose work doesn't necessarily appeal to a huge portion of the fight fan community. To someone like myself, I consider him a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Well, stay hard, Strange Brew. Hope you're doing well out there. Lewinson Cade, another unfortunate turn in the road here. Continued fighting after the Ultimate Fighter until 2010. Probably the most high-profile fight he had was about with Jason Mayhem Miller, which he lost by rear naked choke. And then in April of 2019, Luden was found dead in his apartment and searched pretty extensively. Couldn't really find any confirmation of exactly what happened. But one thing that's not talked about in the show was he was in the military and apparently had some PTSD from his time there, and also was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So sounds like probably a rough couple years there for Lewinson Cade. This, of course, is not mentioned at all in the Dark Side of the Cage that's on the first season of The Ultimate Fighter.
Wow.
Yeah. Trying to bring it back a little bit lighter. We'll talk about Willa Ford real quick here.
The real star of the show.
The fifth Beatle.
I didn't want to put all the sorrow back to back to back.
I know, but I thought it was going to be like a fighter that became a contender and he said it's Willow. I was like, oh my God.
So Willa had a good run for herself. I think I'm going to have to watch the Anna Nicole Smith story, which is a biographical film where she plays Anna Nicole Smith that came out in 07. We give her props for her role in the abysmal 2009 Friday the 13th. Made a handful of movies after that, had television appearances up until 2019. And based on her Instagram page, she's just content living the mom life. She married NFL linebacker Ryan Neese, and they, I think, have 2 or 3 kids, but I think just kind of stepped away and is happy living her life. So good for Willa. She knew when to step away.
Literally what I was about to say. She knew when to stop.
She could have phoned her ex-boyfriend Chuck and said, "Hey, maybe you should just step away. Go play Anna Nicole Smith in a movie or something."
Do it for me.
As soon as airbrushing and bedazzling got out of the fashion sense, she said, "The scene's not for me anymore. I need to find my own way."
I don't understand these kids anymore. All right, moving on. Dana White. What became of him? Fuck him. If you want to know about him, you can read about him. We're not going to talk about Dana White here. I sent the boys a video to watch to prep for this. In 2018, the UFC hosted like a reunion with much of the cast of the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, just to kind of reflect and pause and think back on what was. And for, the purposes of the show we're doing, these guys did us a favor in working in a bunch of references that we fixated on throughout the process of the recording here. So the 2018 reunion, guys are looking pretty good. Got my notes here that the non-fighters specifically look very good, with the exception of Josh Rafferty, who looks like a rich housewife's midlife crisis affair.
Does he have the man bun? Is that Rafferty?
Yeah, but he also has that weird pirate mustache with the little soul patch on it. It's very strange. But guys, this is good fun. There's still a couple turns to come in our story that kind of make us watch this and go, oh. But Joe, this is innocent enough. And this was in the midst of Chris Lieben's redemption arc. So we get that on full display here.
Yeah, as you said, it does. There are some elements that have aged differently, but generally it's fun to watch them kind of reminisce and such. And the big photo and the way that Randy sort of relishes it was very funny. Because Randy describes, for those of you who haven't seen this, the original photo of the whole cast. They're going to recreate that. And Randy is the one who's given the honor of announcing that's what they're going to do. And he's like, what they're going to do is, guys, they're going to put the photo next to the old one. We'll compare them. So then they show them taking the photo, and then it cuts back, and he's looking at it, and he's going, wow, there's the old photo, and here's the new one. And it's like, yes, you told me that was what they were going to do. You just announced it. It was fascinating. He seemed to sort of, maybe it was editing. I don't know. I mean, but yeah, no, it was cute. It was a nice video.
But of course, it instantly, there's 3 major absences, and we know why Thacker is not there, because Thacker has been MIA. Koscheck didn't come back.
Well,
I'm sure you'll tell me why, but I was like,
yeah. Man,
it's not even that he didn't come back. He is not even acknowledged. His absence is not acknowledged in the video. Neither is Thacker's, right? If they were brought up during that dinner, that's been edited out, because all we see is the interaction of the fighters are there. But also, I was surprised that Dana White was not there, because
well, they make sure to give him credit. Right. Everyone thank Dana. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess at this point in 2018, he has so many other places he needed to be that he just didn't feel like it. But it was weird because he's such a big part of that first season. It's in almost every episode. There are episodes where he's featured prominently. So he was part of the cast and he was not there. And I guess we could say Willa should have been there too. But maybe it was a testicles only affair. Because
Chuck's wife, that didn't work for her, brother.
We get a call back to the asparagus incident where Diego orders asparagus for Stefan a la carte. It's a deep cut, but I appreciate it there. And then Stefan has probably the line of the whole thing where he's like, he tells Sam Hoger, please tell me you brought a suitcase full of everyone's shit to return it to us. And dude, Sam is still saying that Peter Welch gave him permission to take all that stuff at the gym. It's fantastic.
Yeah, aesthetically speaking, my first thought when I see them piling into this room is that dinner they had before the fatherless bastard incident at the Hard Rock in Vegas. That is so poorly lit. It's almost like they snuck a camera in there to film that. And now they have a private room booked. The lighting's great. It looks like they have a ring cam set up for the talking head segments for this thing. It just goes, it's a nice representative of how far the UFC has come since 2005, even from a production standpoint, where they had their shit together for this and really had a nice dinner with the lads to reflect on how far they've all come in as men.
Laughed out loud at Nate Corey calling Bobby Southworth fat.
Yes.
I laughed out loud at that.
Were you disappointed that we didn't get a shot of Chris Lieben either ordering or eating ahi tuna?
I forgot all about that.
I thought that was coming. And Lieben, man, I almost didn't recognize him. He seems so put together, and I don't know if that was just for this dinner or if that's where he was at that point in his life. But I was like, oh, he turned it around. I mean, we just saw him fight, and the grin along we did with Joe, and he still looked like the wild guy from The Ultimate Fighter. So this dude looked like Lieben's dad, Lieben's older, wiser brother. I mean, I don't know, but the way he was talking, he didn't sound like Lieben. He sounded like an adult, and he wasn't even, because Stephen Bonner was kind of the rowdiest one at that reunion dinner, right? Like he was trying to keep starting shit with with Hoger and just being really loud, and whereas like Lieben, I don't even know if he was drinking. He was just, I don't know.
This is when he had started, he had already sobered up. He even makes that reference of, my heart was all fucked up. I just stopped drinking and doing cocaine, and somehow that worked,
Right, he does
it is good too of Diego. We can still get the jabs at yoga, because Diego's like, you gonna get into the yoga? He's like, well, I don't know about that.
They keep flashing their little things, as they go around the table. Diego's the only one that's still fighting at that point, and I guess Chuck is going to fight, right? Everybody else has moved on. They're like training or they're working somewhere else.
We're going to get to Diego here in just a second. But he would fight in more ways than one in the years to come. Last call out, Chris Lieben and Mike Swick still a fresh wound there. Their first fight for Mike Swick, saying, I wasn't knocked out. I was TKO'd. But yeah, I mean, for what it is and what it can be, it's a fun little piece of business here. But Julio, already, I knew he would sniff it out and immediately go, well, hold on, something's missing here. And that's something being Josh Koscheck, the one and only, the public enemy number one of the first season of The Ultimate Fighter. Following The Ultimate Fighter, Josh Koscheck remained in the UFC. And thank you for listening to this episode of TUFtwenty. A reminder to subscribe to the podcast, visit wearethecontrarians.com, and follow the Contrarians across social media at Contrarian Prime.
You can also follow Alex individually at Contrarian Alex, and you can check out our other special projects on our Patreon channel at patreon.com/Contrarian Prime. If you want to listen to Alex teach me about The Rock and John Cena, that's where you need to go.
You can catch me weekly on the Late Night Grin, live and free on YouTube every Friday night. In addition, Alex and I collaborate monthly on Grin Grappler, discussing some of pro wrestling's biggest and baddest. If those grins are for you, check out LNG Gold, our YouTube membership plan that includes over 50 hours of exclusive content each month.
You can follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at NotDrDeath. That's NotDrDeath. Or you can block me now and save us both a lot of embarrassment.
Until next time, be sure to make your coaches proud and don't call anyone a fatherless bastard.